Wyoming Territory. Summer of 1879. The sun had just begun to rise over the Sweetwater River when the girl staggered out of the cottonwoods, barefoot and bleeding, dragging two small children behind her. Isaiah Jennings had just dismounted to check a broken fence post on his land when he saw her. He stood still a long second, squinting through the morning haze. The woman was swaying, her dress torn, one of the kids clinging to her skirt and the other limping beside her. Dust clung to the sweat on her skin. Her hair was loose, tangled with twigs and blood at the temple. He dropped the hammer and walked toward her, slow but steady, hands open at his sides. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you hurt." The woman blinked up at him like she was trying to focus her eyes. "They're not mine," she rasped, voice raw. "But I could not leave them." Isaiah nodded once, already reaching out. "All right, let's get you all some water." The girl flinched as he moved closer, throwing an arm out in front of the children. "You touch them, I will kill you." "I am not touching anyone," Isaiah said gently. "I just want to help." She stared at him long enough to make his chest tighten. Then her knees buckled and she crumpled into the dirt. Isaiah caught her before she hit the ground. Her name was Prudence Zeiler. She was 22 and had been married to a man twice her age, a man who sold whiskey and cruelty in equal measure. She had not spoken much in the first 2 days, just drank the water he brought and sat out on his porch with the children. Only when Isaiah had bandaged the older child's foot, a girl named Noreen, maybe 5, with eyes too watchful for her age, did Prudence finally speak at length. "They are not mine," she repeated. "Their mother died on the trail. He took them in because he thought it would make him look godly. He hurt them when he drank. I tried to stop it." Isaiah did not ask what happened next. He had seen the bruises on her ribs when he helped her change into a clean shirt, his gaze never lifting above her collarbone. He just nodded and said, "You did right." That night, he made stew and gave her the only room with a door. He slept outside by the barn with his bedroll and rifle nearby. The children curled up beside her on the straw-stuffed mattress, safe for the first time in weeks. By the 5th day, she was walking upright again, hair brushed and braided. She helped with the chickens, watched Noreen and little Nalan stack firewood. Isaiah came in from the pasture one afternoon to find her stitching a torn saddlebag with steady hands. "You do not have to earn your keep," he said, setting his gloves down. "I know," she said, "but it helps to do something." He nodded, then hesitated. "You got somewhere you want to go?" Her eyes lifted to his. "I did not think I would live long enough to wonder that." Isaiah did not smile. He just sat down across from her and said, "You can stay here as long as you like. No one's coming for you." She looked away quickly, like the words hit too deep. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Isaiah fixed the roof. Prudence taught Noreen how to read from an old primer she found in a trunk. Nalan followed Isaiah everywhere, watching him with silent awe. Isaiah started cutting extra wood for winter without thinking about it. One night, as the wind rattled the shutters and a storm gathered out west, Prudence stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames. Isaiah leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Something on your mind?" She turned slowly, her eyes shining but her jaw tight. "I keep waiting to feel safe," she whispered. "But I still sleep with my hand under the pillow. I still flinch when someone raises their voice. I do not know who I am anymore." Isaiah walked closer, stopping a foot away. "You are someone who got 2 kids out of hell," he said. "You are someone who still stands tall after all that." Her breath hitched. "Sometimes I want to hit something, scream, break things. And sometimes I want to be held so bad it hurts." Isaiah's voice was rough when he spoke. "You can hit me if you want." She blinked fast. "What? You can hit me if you want," he repeated, "but I will only hold you." She stared at him, lips trembling. Then slowly she stepped into his arms. Isaiah wrapped her up like he had been waiting his whole life for her to let him. She did not cry. She just leaned her forehead against his chest and breathed deep, like she was finally coming up for air. After that night, something shifted between them, not in words but in looks. In how she handed him his coffee in the morning, her fingers brushing his. In how he lingered longer by the porch every night, watching her braid Noreen's hair. In how he reached for her without thinking, steadying her on uneven ground, brushing a leaf from her shoulder, letting her lean against his chest when she thought no one was watching. She smiled more. He spoke more. The children laughed again, and slowly, the fear in her eyes faded. By late July, the sun was high and the wheat golden. Isaiah was hammering a new hinge onto the barn door when Prudence came up behind him, wiping her hands on her apron. "I have been thinking," she said, looking out over the field. He stood and turned to her. "About what?" "About staying," she said. "About what it means." Isaiah waited. She looked up at him, eyes clear. "It means I want this, you, all of it, not just because I am afraid to leave, but because I want to stay." Isaiah reached out, touched her cheek. "You already have," he said. She leaned in and their lips met, slow, sure, like they had both been waiting for that exact moment. And when she pulled back, she smiled, the first real one he had ever seen on her. "I love you," she said, voice quiet but steady. He smiled too, just a little. "I love you more." And there, beside the barn with dust on their boots and the sky wide open above them, they knew they were home. The mornings came earlier now, sun rising pale and hazy over the ridge before the rooster even stirred. Prudence was usually up before it crested the line of hills, fingers stiff as she wrung out the washcloth in cold water and brushed Nalan's hair smooth with her palm. The boy had grown sturdier in the weeks since they arrived, his silence less haunted than watchful now. Noreen had taken to humming softly while she swept the porch, as though she'd forgotten to be afraid. Prudence carried the breakfast pail out to Isaiah where he knelt by the irrigation ditch, sleeves rolled and dirt up to his elbows. He glanced up when she came close, then held out a hand for the corn bread she'd wrapped in a cloth. "Ground's drying too fast," he said, taking a bite. "Might need to move the channel farther north past the willow." She stood beside him, shading her eyes. "Won't that cut off the pasture?" "Might, but if the roots don't get water, nothing else'll matter." She crouched beside him and ran her hand over the cracked soil. "I can dig. My back's good now." His eyes flicked to hers and he nodded once, slow. "We'll start after supper. If we work together, we'll have it done by next week." She touched her fingertips to the edge of the cloth in his hand. "Isaiah, I want to learn how to read the weather like you do. I want to know when a storm's coming without needing someone to tell me." He didn't answer right away. Just chewed the last of the bread and brushed his hands clean against his trousers. Then he stood and offered his palm to help her up. "We'll start with Cloud Heights," he said. "After chores." She took his hand. The lesson began that evening as they walked the fence line. He pointed out the shape of the clouds, the way the wind curled the grass in different directions, how the air changed scent just before rain. She repeated everything he said under her breath, like a prayer. When he paused to check a loose rail, she knelt beside him and steadied the board without waiting to be asked. Later, after the children had gone to sleep and the fire had burned low, she stepped outside and found him on the porch stairs, sharpening his knife by lantern light. "You always work this late?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Only when I can't sleep." She sat beside him. "You used to be a soldier." His hand stilled for a moment, then resumed the motion. "Yes. Did you come back whole?" The stone scraped against the blade. "No." She folded her hands in her lap. "Me neither." The knife went still in his hands. He set it aside and turned toward her, his face unreadable in the flickering light. I don't know how to be with someone without wondering if I'll lose them, she said. And I sure as hell don't know how to want things and not feel like I'm stealing. He didn't reach for her this time, just spoke quiet and steady. You're not stealing, you're surviving. There's a difference. She leaned back against the porch post, the wood warm behind her. What if I forget how to be soft? What if all that's left of me is the part that had to fight? His voice was barely above a whisper. Then I'll remind you. She turned to him, eyes wide. Why? Isaiah looked at her like there was no question in the world more obvious. Because you're worth remembering. The silence after that was full, not empty. She didn't speak again until the lantern burned low and the stars brightened overhead. I used to make paper flowers, she said, voice distant, out of scraps. I'd give them to the neighbor girl when her father was sick. Haven't thought of that in years. Isaiah stood and offered his hand. She took it, and he helped her to her feet like she weighed nothing at all. You'll make them again, he said. When you're ready. She didn't let go of his hand until they reached the door. The next morning, she found a stack of old newspaper tucked beneath the flour sack on the shelf. No one mentioned it, but that night, something bright and crooked bloomed beside the window, a single paper rose, folded by hands that remembered how. When Isaiah saw it, he didn't say a word. Just touched its edge gently in passing, like it was made of glass. And Prudence, watching from the doorway, felt something deepen in her chest. Not a surge, not a rush, just a quiet knowing she belonged here, she was wanted. August settled over the valley with dry heat and the smell of sun-warmed sage. The river had thinned to a narrow ribbon, slow-moving and clear, and the wheat fields rustled low like they were whispering to one another. Prudence stood at the edge of the garden, sleeves rolled past her elbows, a basket of squash balanced against her hip. The hem of her dress was caked with dust, and sweat darkened the back of her neck. She didn't mind it. The work quieted her thoughts. Behind the house, Isaiah was mending the axle on the wagon they used for hauling fence rails. His hammer rose and fell with steady rhythm. Nalan sat nearby, watching every movement with the same intent look he gave to squirrels and grasshoppers, like the world was full of things he was still trying to understand. Prudence knelt to pull a weed from between the beans, then glanced back toward the house. Inside, Noreen was trying to stitch a button to her blouse. She'd refused help, determined to finish it herself, lower lip tucked between her teeth. After dinner, when the dishes were dry in the rack, and the children had gone to bed with the windows open to catch the breeze, Prudence brought out the tin box of letters she'd kept hidden beneath the floorboard in the barn loft. She hadn't opened it since they'd arrived. The paper inside was wrinkled, stained by years of hiding and rereading. She sat cross-legged near the fire and turned one over in her hands, her sister's handwriting, the loop of the letters unmistakable. The last letter she'd received was dated 2 years back, with no return address. Isaiah came in from the barn, brushing hay from his trousers. He didn't ask what she held, but he sat beside her, stretching his legs long in front of him. She was younger than me, Prudence said, eyes still on the paper. Always believed if you prayed hard enough, someone would come for you. Isaiah leaned forward to stir the fire with a stick. Did anyone? She folded the letter slowly. No, but she never stopped waiting. I did. He didn't press her, just rested his elbow on his knee and looked into the flames. I think about writing her sometimes, Prudence continued. But I don't know what I'd say, that I ran, that I took 2 children and fled a man who made the world small and cruel, that I found something better here with a man who doesn't ask me to be anything but alive. Isaiah's voice was quiet. You don't owe her an explanation. I know, she said. But maybe I owe myself one. She placed the letters back in the box, closed the lid gently, and set it aside. Then she turned to Isaiah. You think it's possible to start again without forgetting who you were before? He looked at her for a long moment. I think starting again means carrying the weight differently, not pretending it wasn't heavy. She nodded, eyes shining in the firelight. Later, as she poured water into the basin for washing, Isaiah came up behind her. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough she could feel the heat of him through her dress. "I've been thinking," he said. She glanced over her shoulder. "About putting up another room out back, something with space for a table, a desk for books." She dried her hands slowly. "You want to teach the children," he shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I just want to build something that holds more than tools and feed." She turned to face him. "You already have." They stood like that for a while, the night air wrapping around them, the scent of pine and dust on the breeze. The next day, Isaiah walked into town. He came back with 2 sacks of nails, a length of window glass wrapped in burlap, and a second-hand reader with dog-eared pages. He set them on the kitchen table without saying much. Prudence didn't ask why he'd chosen that day of all days. She just ran her fingers over the embossed cover of the book and smiled. In the evenings that followed, they worked side by side. She held the board steady while he sawed. He handed her the square and showed her how to mark the angles clean. The children watched, sometimes helping, sometimes chasing each other in the tall grass. On the 5th night, after the walls were up and the rafters set, Isaiah stepped down from the ladder with sawdust in his hair and a splinter in his palm. Prudence took his hand without hesitation and pulled the sliver free. He didn't flinch. "You trust me now," she said, brushing the dirt from his skin. "Always did," he replied. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Then she touched his cheek, rough with stubble, and leaned in until her forehead rested against his. "I didn't think I'd ever feel safe in a house again," she whispered. Isaiah lifted his hand and placed it over hers where it lay against his chest. "You built this one," he said. And in that quiet space between breath and heartbeat, something settled. Not just comfort, but belonging. They didn't speak again that night, but when she lay down beside him, she didn't curl away. She pressed close, her fingers resting just above his heart. And he held her, like he meant to keep her there forever. The first frost came early that year. It crept in overnight, silvering the tops of the fence rails and leaving the rows of kale crisp edged by dawn. Prudence stood at the threshold of the new room, arms folded tight across her shawl, watching her breath pool in the morning air. From inside came the sound of Noreen slowly reading aloud, her voice halting but clear. Nalan lay on his belly near the stove, coloring on scrap paper with a bit of charcoal Isaiah had shaved down for him. Isaiah had gone to check the creek-fed troughs before sunrise. He moved slower now, not because he was tired, but because he noticed more hoofprints, bird calls, the way the cattle grouped tighter when the wind shifted. Prudence had seen it too, the careful way he studied the land, like it spoke in a language he'd come to understand only by living through silence. That evening, after the table had been cleared and the lantern trimmed low, Prudence brought a folded wool shirt to where Isaiah sat oiling the saddle straps. She held it out. "I hemmed the sleeves," she murmured. "They were catching when you rode." Isaiah took it, turned it over once in his hands. "Didn't realize you'd noticed." "I do," she said. "Small things." He looked up at her, something quiet in his face. "You always did." She sat beside him on the floor, knees brushing his. For a long while neither of them spoke. The only sound was the creak of leather and the wind shifting through the eaves. Then she asked, "Do you ever miss the life you had before this?" Isaiah's hand stilled. "No, but I remember it." "That's not the same," he nodded. "I don't miss the weight. Just learned how to carry it better." Prudence looked down at her lap. "I used to think the only way to survive was to forget, But sometimes I wake and still see his boots by the door, still hear the way the latch sounded when he came in. Isaiah set the saddle strap aside. "You never told me what happened that last night." "I don't want to remember it," she said, "but I do." "You don't have to tell me, I know," she said, "but I want to." Her voice was steady, but her hands tightened in her skirts. "He'd been drinking, said Nolan cried too much. Said Noreen wouldn't stop staring. I tried to get between them. He hit me, I hit back." Isaiah didn't move, he waited. "I thought he'd kill me," she said. "I thought that was it. But he slipped on the hearthstone when he came at me again, cracked his head on the iron kettle. I didn't check if he was breathing, just took the children and ran." Isaiah reached across the space between them and took her hand in his, not tight, just enough. "You didn't run," he said. "You chose something better." She exhaled, slow and long. "I still see blood on the floor, even when I know it's not there." Isaiah's thumb moved along the back of her hand. "I see different ghosts, but they stay quiet when I'm with you." Her hand turned in his, fingers curling into his palm. "I was afraid that if I let myself be loved again, I'd go back to being someone small," she whispered. "Someone who waited to be told what she was worth." "You're not small," he said, "and no one gets to name your worth but you." She leaned into him, shoulder to shoulder. "I'm still learning how to believe that." Isaiah rested his cheek against her temple. "So am I." They stayed like that until the lantern burned down low and the fire gave off only a faint orange glow. When she finally stood, she let her fingers trail across his jaw before stepping away. "Come to bed," she said. He looked up, eyes steady. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said. "Not because I need to forget, but because I want to remember this. You, us." He followed her without another word, the quiet between them full of something whole. In the days that followed, the wind turned colder. They hung quilts over the windows, sealed the doors tight. Isaiah built a rack for drying herbs in the kitchen. Prudence taught Noreen how to steep willow bark for fevers. Nolan learned to feed kindling to the fire without burning his fingers, watching the flames with calm curiosity. One afternoon, while Isaiah dug out the root cellar behind the barn, Prudence sat on the porch with a needle in hand and a length of muslin across her knees. She stitched slow, careful rows into the fabric, forming letters that would spell out a name. A name for something that hadn't existed yet, but might. When Isaiah came up from the slope, mud on his boots and sleeves rolled, she looked up at him with a soft, unreadable smile. "I think I might be expecting," she said. He stopped short. "You sure?" "Not yet," she said, "but I know my body, and I know the feeling of something new growing." Isaiah stepped up to her, knelt down in the dirt, and placed a hand gently over hers. "You're not alone," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what makes this different." His hand stayed over hers, steady as the mountains beyond the ridge, and in that stillness, with the sun warm on their backs and the sound of the children laughing inside, the weight they carried didn't vanish. But it shifted. Became something shared, something strong, and something that, at last, could carry them forward. By late September, the cottonwoods along the river turned amber and gold. Wind came down off the ridges sharp as a blade, and the smell of wood smoke began to settle in for good. Isaiah had just finished lining the root cellar with straw and shelves when he heard the wagon creak into the yard. The oxen kicked up dust as they came to a halt, and the driver, a widow from 3 homesteads over, climbed down with a burlap sack and a weary smile. She'd brought the last of her preserves, trading jars of pickled onions and apple butter for seed rye and a coil of rope. Prudence stepped out to greet her, shawl wrapped tight, hair pinned up in a way that made her look older than her years. "Sure you don't want to stay for supper?" Prudence asked as they loaded the goods into the cellar. The other woman shook her head, glancing toward the road. "I've got my eldest keeping watch on the younger ones." Can't leave them too long with that much lamp oil in the house." They exchanged a few quiet words, and then the woman climbed back onto her wagon. Isaiah tipped his hat, watching the cart disappear down the road. As the wind picked up, Prudence turned to him. "I've been thinking about the land just past the hill. The flat stretch near the cottonwoods." Isaiah raised a brow. "It floods in spring." "I know," she said. "But if we set stones along the edge and dig a trench, it'd make good ground for carrots and barley. The soil's dark." I checked. He studied her for a moment. "You planning to farm it yourself?" "With your help," she said, crossing her arms. "If you're willing." He nodded once. "I am." That night she brought out the quilt squares she'd been stitching since July. Not the flowered kind, but sturdy blocks in deep reds and blues, each one pressed flat and edged in tiny neat stitches. She laid them out on the floor, arranging them by lantern light. Isaiah watched her from the doorway, arms folded against the cold draft. "You making that for the baby?" She shook her head. "For us. So when winter comes and we're all in one room, there's something here we built together." He stepped inside, boots quiet on the plank floor, and crouched beside her. "You want me to help?" She glanced sideways at him. "You any good with a needle?" "No," he said. "But I can cut fabric straight if you mark it." She handed him the shears and pointed to a stack of old shirts she'd bundled earlier. "Start with those. The sleeves are too thin to wear through snow, but the backs are strong." They worked until long after the children were asleep, the fire low and steady behind them. He cut. She stitched. And when she finally stood to stretch, Isaiah reached out and touched her wrist lightly. "You been feeling all right?" She nodded. "Tired sometimes, but not sick. We'll make room when it's time. I'll build another bedstead." "Not yet," she said. "I want to wait till the ground's frozen. Then we'll know how much space we'll need come spring." "Practical," he said, smiling faintly. "I've had enough surprises," she said. "I'd rather plan what I can." Later, when they lay in bed, her back to his chest and his arm draped over her waist, she whispered, "Do you ever wonder how it happened, how we ended up here?" Isaiah's voice was thick with sleep. "I don't wonder. I'm just glad we did." "I think about it sometimes," she said. "How I was running one way and you were standing still, and somehow we met in the middle." "You weren't running," he murmured. "You were choosing." She turned in his arms, then rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she said. "Not because you saved me, but because you saw me when I didn't know I was still worth seeing." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You've always been worth seeing." They didn't speak after that. There was no need. Winter came early in the mountains. The first deep snow fell in mid-October. Isaiah spent the next week hauling in firewood, while Prudence lined the windows with quilts and taught Noreen how to knead dough without overworking it. Nalan started humming while he played, soft, tuneless sounds that filled the corners of the house like warmth. In December, Prudence gave birth to a daughter by the fire, with Isaiah's hand in hers and Noreen asleep in the next room. The baby was quiet at first, then let out a sharp cry that made Isaiah's shoulders drop and Prudence's eyes fill. They named her Clara after his mother. That winter passed slow and close. Meals were simple, days were short, but the house was full. Full of breath and quiet laughter, of hands reaching across the table and boots lined up by the hearth. Full of something new, born not from escape but from choosing to stay. By spring, the cottonwoods had budded again. Isaiah planted barley in the field below the rise, and Prudence, with Clara strapped to her chest, scattered carrot seeds between the rows. Noreen read aloud from the reader while Nalan carved shapes into the soft bark of a fallen branch. Isaiah built the new bedstead. Prudence finished the quilt. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and the birds quieted, she stepped out onto the porch and found him sitting there, boots off, shirt sleeves rolled. She sat beside him and he took her hand. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because the silence between them was no longer born of fear or grief, but of peace, of having come through the long dark and found, on the other side, something solid and steady, a life shaped by small things done with care, a home built not only of wood and stone, but of choice, of love, lived and proven. And as night fell and the first stars blinked into view, Isaiah leaned over and kissed her temple. They stayed that way until the moon rose, holding each other whole.